Aloha! This is Kenny Wilson, welcoming you to kdubsplace. We got all sorts of things going on. Tonight's presentation is going to be a look into a little episode from the Todd Rundgren files from the book entitled "It Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time: The Real Life Antics of a 20th Century Kid." Okay, we're gonna add a little music for the soundtrack, and see you on the other side. And now a few things from the Todd Rundgren files. This regards a time in 1973. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time. Sometime in August, while Diane and I were staying at my parents', probably due to everyone else being out of town for some reason, I got a call from my pal Mark, who said that he was reading the notice in the New York Times about a concert recording session in Central Park by that guy whose music I liked a lot. That guy was Todd Rundgren. I asked him when it was happening. He said, "Today." I put the phone down, grabbed Diane, and we got in the car and started driving. Early in the year, Todd had released the follow-up album to his remarkable Something Anything put out the year before. The new album was called A Wizard, a True Star, and sounded like it was recorded by a completely different person. More to the point, it sounded like the drugs had just kicked in. I mean, good drugs. His previous record was a testament to highly evolved production techniques, and it was filled with pure pop magic as well as plenty of offbeat rock and roll rave-ups with wit and sarcasm galore in not only his lyrics, but his whole approach. What he accomplished with Wizard was a dense, almost maniacal, yet incredibly musical song cycle on the first side, bookended by the great international feel, and with enough information in between to completely overwhelm the senses. The second side included a medley of R&B classics, but also just a bunch of great songs, with the finale being one of my favorite rock anthems of all time called Just One Victory. Anyway, I became a disciple of Reverend Rundgren's, as Paul Schaefer would call him, and continue to do so to this day. So we drove up to New York without even thinking much about it. By the time we had gotten up to the city, found Central Park, parked the car, and made it to the concert venue. The concert was pretty much over, but he was getting ready to record the crowd singing a new song called Sons of 1984. So we took a seat, got a lyric sheet, and sang along with Todd and his other disciples. Inside the album, A Wizard, a True Star, was a postcard that, if filled out, would result in your name being printed somewhere on the next album. I, of course, filled it out, and when the next album, simply called Todd, came out, Diane and I were singing on it. We appeared in a picture of the singing crowd on the back, and my name appeared on the insert, along with a whole bunch of other names. After the recording of the song in Central Park, we did one more jam with the band. I believe it was Crossroads, and then it was over. I had brought a copy of one of my recordings along with me, hoping that I'd get a chance to give it to the man himself. So we walked back to the side of the stage where there was virtually no security. And as the car he was in started to pull out, I tossed the tape in the back seat, but gently, of course. Then that was it. We went back to the car and drove back home. Over the years, I continued to attempt to give him copies of my music, sometimes successfully. I even got to speak to him on occasion, albeit briefly, but I'd be very surprised if he remembers any of it. And if he does, it's probably a memory of one of those usual lunatics who do such things. Oh well, I'll probably never know, and that's fine with me. Oh, we're back. During this period of time, with a bunch of new recordings under the proverbial belt, I ventured down to Richmond to meet up with my old chum, Richard, in order to catch a Todd Rundgren show at the Mosque. His Todd album had just come out, with the Central Park recording that Diane and I had been on, and his hair was now multiple colors. Cool. And Richard seemed to know something about where the band was staying, so I put a reel-to-reel of my new stuff in the bag and made the trip thinking I might get to hand the Toddster another sampling of the tunes. The night before the show, I went over to the hotel that my source said was the place, and I even had a floor to go to, which was part of the info I had gathered. When I got to the supposed floor on which Rundgren was supposed to be holding up, it was dead silent in the corridor outside the elevator, so I took a seat on a bench next to the elevator door. Not long after that, the elevator door opened, and out stepped someone that looked familiar. I recognized the gent as John Siegler, who was holding down the bass guitar position in the band. I politely engaged him with a quick question, which was, "Would you be able to give this to Todd for me?" He said to follow him, and led me to a door leading into one of the rooms. When I entered, there was a room full of people, guys and chicks alike, with Todd holding court in a chair at the end of all these folks, seated on a couch and various chairs. They all seemed to look at me curiously, and I then cast my glance to the main guy, asked if I could give him something, and showed the tape in my hand. He said sure, so I moved through everyone and went to hand it to him with shaking hands. Of course, I misjudged the distance, I guess, because the thing went tumbling to the floor. He picked it up, I said thanks, and split. The show the next night, of course, was great, and I went back home successfully, completing. One thing that happened on Kauai, and something that I was directly involved with, at the beginning at least, was the creation of KKCR, which is the public radio station that went on the air for the first time that year. My pal Richard and some other cats are the ones that got the thing off the ground, and through his involvement I joined the crew as well, and participated in the organizational meetings that went down leading up to the magical liftoff of this wonderful thing. You'll find a little bit of everything in its programming, and you can get the live stream anywhere in the world as far as I know. Just type KKCR into your search engine and that ought to do the trick. Not only was I around during the meetings that took place just before its initial airing, but because my pal Art was coordinating a lot of the construction of the building that housed the studio and offices, I also was in there doing some of the interior painting as well. When the station was preparing for the kickoff and the signal that went out to everyone's radios was being tested, there were only a handful of musical CDs that went round and round in order for the technicians to evaluate and tweak the sound being sent out to the various parts of the island. But one day, after that had been going on for several days, all of a sudden there was a microphone that got plugged in, and it was sitting right there on the desk, all by its lonesome. I just happened to be in there painting that day, and when I heard that it was ready to be tested, I asked if it was all right if I played a few things and spoke a few words. Excuse me. The okay was given, and I became the first one to actually be a DJ of sorts, at least for a short while. The first tune I played was Todd Rundgren's Just One Victory, which seemed fitting for the occasion. Actually, I played several tracks, discussing them briefly as I went on, and I was having a blast. At some point, my buddy Kenny Emerson walked through the door to see what was going on, saw me at the helm, and came over and sat right down. We proceeded to get a little repartee going, and when he and I would get together on stage, the results were usually humorous, to say the least. It was no different this lovely afternoon as we played some songs and made comical references to various aspects of what we were doing. I guess the powers that be didn't think it was as funny as we did, so we were kindly asked to cease and desist. But regardless, I've always felt good about being the first real DJ on KKCR. And as far as my role in the organizing committee went, I proposed that I do a show featuring music from Kauai musical artists, as well as music by some of the part-time residents or frequent visitors who had contributed whatever they could to various benefits and or charities associated with the Garden Island. On top of that, I would provide a weekly rundown of all the live music venues and who is, who is performing in these establishments. I felt that I was uniquely qualified to do so because I knew where all these places were anyway, and personally knew most of the musicians and a lot of the people who ran these places. And I carried with me no favoritism or bias when it came to reporting all of this activity to the public. The organizers thought it would be a good idea, so I started getting together the first show, because the deal was that, at least at the beginning, they wanted the shows to be produced prior to airing in order to keep control of the content over the airwaves. Fair enough. Other than my friend Richard, I really didn't know any of the other cats in the room. And right before things were going to kick into high gear, Richard went out on the road to do his tour manager thing, leaving me alone with those guys. They still treated me as one of the team, though, so everything was still on track as far as I was concerned. Anyway, when all the programming kicked in, I did the first show, and as far as I could tell, it went over well. The local musicians I talked to after the airing of the show all thought it was a great idea. Then something happened that I wasn't ready for at all. The station started getting calls from a couple of restaurant owners that didn't provide local live music, complaining that the other guys were getting free advertising. With no one to back me up at the meetings, the plug was pulled and my idea of promoting live music was nixed after only one airing. Oh well, so I walked on down the road and involved myself with something else. But KKCR became and still is a great beacon of diversified musical entertainment and news, both local and otherwise, and I'm proud to have been a small part of it. Carry on, my brothers and sisters. In 1998, I was living on Art Rodarte's property down by the Anahola River. It's a beautiful, secluded setting, and I was staying in a little A-frame structure on the hill overlooking the main house. Art and I had been playing music together for a while at this point, and we were both involved with the birth of KKCR, the community radio station, which had been operating for about a year in the early summer days of '98. And although my direct involvement with KKCR was over, Art was still involved in manning his own blues-based show once a week. Another person who had a show at that time called Chick Talk, was Michele Rundgren, Todd's wife. Actually, they weren't technically married prior to this, but I believe she'd been using the name Rundgren for some time. I'm really not sure of that, so don't hold me to it. Anyway, on June 22nd of that year, there was going to be a big party to celebrate Todd's 50th birthday, as well as the formal marriage of he and Michele. Michele went about inviting everyone who is directly involved in the radio station, so I was told. And so Art got an invitation for he and one other person. His wife was going to be working that day and night, and so knowing that I was quite the Todd, or as they say, a toddy these days, would I like to attend the gathering? Let me see. I don't know. I guess so. Of course, I'm just kidding about that. I really didn't have to think very long about it. The location of this event was south and across the valley from Kilauea town. I believe it is still considered Kilauea, but it's kind of the other side of the tracks, so to speak. Todd owned a nice piece of property there, along with although no formal housing structure had been built yet. I went to this thing imagining that there would be various rock stars from the mainland, a lot of jamming and other great live music. At the very least, I knew it had to be quite interesting. When Art and I got there, a pretty good-sized crowd had already assembled. There was a big tent that I assumed would be where the happy partygoers would dine and drink and where the music would happen. Bill Kreutzmann, the Grateful Dead guy, had a place on the same road, and he had arranged to have his big pile of drums. Since Backbone days, he had had his gigantic Grateful Dead drum set flown over from California, set up on one end of the tent area. So I knew there was going to be some music action, I should say, later on. Just a stone's throw from the tent, there was a string of small tents set up. The word was that Todd and Michele and their gang had been staying up there for a few days, and, well, the person seemed to have to tell me that hallucinogens might have been involved. Whatever. There was also a baby grand piano sitting on the far end of the tent from Wild Bill's drums. No electronic equipment, that is to say PA equipment, mics, etc., was visible though. I was also told by someone that the piano was there for Todd to kind of screw around on when he was there. Then a few steps away from the tent, a martini bar was set up. It seems that is the libation of choice for Mr. Rundgren. At some point, the crowd was asked to gather at another location, a short distance from where we had been. It was a grassy hill that formed a quasi-amphitheater setting with a gazebo-like structure down below, standing on a stage-like structure. We all gathered on the hill. Todd then got on the stage to address the guests. His exact words elude me at the moment, but it went something like this. "I don't know who any of you are, but Michele, wanted to have a party, so here you are. He then went on to explain why they were formalizing the marriage at this time, and then various family members got up there and other words were said about the celebration. When that was concluded, we all went back to the tent area to eat and drink. I passed on the eating myself, but I did participate with vigor when it came to the wonders the beer kegs provided. I was still wondering about the live music when I saw a DJ setting his rig up. After investigating the situation, I discovered that the DJ was the only intended musical presentation for the guests' dancing pleasure. Strange that. I say that because, well, why were Kreutzmann's drums set up? I didn't recognize any famous rock stars. A couple of Todd's band guys at the time might have been there, but I didn't know what they looked like back then, so... there were several kawaii musicians hanging around, but I didn't think they had the nerve to get anything going. So I hobnobbed around with those who I knew while absorbing the beer and the sights and the sounds. Then something happened that I thought was quite funny. I could have stopped it in its tracks, but decided to play with it all along. On 3 different occasions, in the span of, say, 45 minutes or so, guys came up to me and said that they knew Todd and they wanted to introduce me to him. I knew one of the guy's face, but for the life of me, I don't think I knew any of their names. But I guess they knew me for some reason or other. At the time, Todd was hanging out over at the Martini Bar for quite a while, and he was standing there for this whole sequence of introductions. The first guy took me over and said, "Todd, I'd like you to meet a great kawaii musician, Kenny Wilson." We shook hands. I thanked him for the party and for being an influence in my life, stuff like that, you know. Okay, one down. The next guy came up a little bit later and said the exact same thing, that he knew Todd and he wanted to introduce me to him. You know, we went through the ritual one more time, only this time I skipped the thank yous because I certainly didn't seem necessary for either Mr. Rundgren or myself. He gave me a funny look, said, "Nice to meet you again," and that was that. Now at this point, it was starting to get dark and the DJ had been doing his thing for a while. It was then that the third guy came up, seemed concerned that there wasn't any live music happening, and suggested that I do something about it. I told him that I wasn't even really invited to the thing and didn't think it was all that cool for me to be making such a decision. At the same time, I saw Bill Kreutzmann start to make a move on his drums. I went over, reintroduced myself, thinking he'd probably remember that I was in a band with him the year before. I couldn't figure out whether he did or not, for you see, he had gotten way off the wagon by then and had gotten himself feeling pretty good, if you know what I mean. I also asked him if he'd like a little accompaniment while he played his drums, because it looked to me like he was getting ready to just bang along with the DJ, and that kind of seemed kind of strange. He seemed to think that was a good idea, and overhearing that, the third guy who had come up to me suggested he introduce me to Todd and ask him if it was alright to get some live music going. I had a feeling that Todd would be kind of tired of this routine, but I had enough beer in me at the moment and thought it was a kind of a barrel of laughs, actually. So I went along with it. He walked me over to Rundgren, made the introduction. TR gave me a funny look. The guy asked him if I could play a little music with Kreutzmann. The birthday boy said that we could do whatever we wanted and that he might listen or he might not. I was kind of hoping he'd pick the latter because I had a feeling that whatever Wild Bill and I were about to do wasn't going to be any masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so the only piece of equipment that was anywhere around other than Bill's drums was the baby grand piano that was sitting there under the tent a long distance from the drums, and there was no sound equipment in the vicinity other than the DJ's little speakers and one microphone that he was using for introducing songs and such. I knew the DJ, so I didn't have a problem asking him if we could rig up his gear so that I could get at least the piano mic'd. He didn't have a problem with it, and he was getting paid anyway, so, you know. I went about putting his mic, which didn't even have a stand, into the piano, and I guess I must have pointed the speakers in such a way that at least one of us, Kreutzmann or I, could hear something. So then we started making some noise. Still, even with the little bit of equipment we had hooked up, we couldn't hear each other much at all. So I decided to just let him do whatever he did while I tried my darndest to play something that would mesh, at least to the uneducated ears out in the audience. We did that for a bit, but it was kind of ridiculous. At some point I had to put a lid on my end and got up from the piano bench. Meanwhile, as this is transpiring, some other guy arrived at the party who had just come from a music gig, and he happened to have some equipment. I think he had a bass amp, nylon string guitar, and a small PA system, so we regrouped. My pal Art, who I'd come with, took on the bass player duty. I grabbed the nylon string guitar and the couple of mics that the guy had, one for the guitar, one for the singing. Of course, Kreutzmann just wanted to bang on the drums all day, so he kept going while we were setting up. Finally, we got together all that we could get together. The next trick was to politely ask our famous drummer to calm down so that we could get a hold of a real song. He was very cooperative in that regard. So I pulled out Buddy Holly's "I Fade Away," which the Dead had played a zillion times, thinking I could get, Bill into some sort of comfort zone. That song's always a sure thing when trying to get something on the spot, going, because it's easy to play and everybody's heard it, whatever. Of course, I only had a nylon string acoustic guitar to play through a mic, so there wasn't a whole lot of meat to our sound, but we persevered. The numbers we played are but a blur in my memory banks, but I do know that I sang "The Wheel," a tune that Todd had done a long time ago. It's only 2 easy chords, but there's a cool riff that kind of holds the thing down. I couldn't pull that off while singing the thing, so it ended up being kind of half-baked. By this time, Todd and his entourage had retreated to their magic tents, but maybe I got a rise out of them with that one. I don't know, who knows, whatever. We played 6 or 7 tunes, and being that the generator was powering the whole tent area, and the whole intention for it was to power the lights and the DJ, our extra oomph that we were putting through it caused the power to go out, at which time we surrendered to the situation at hand and brought the little jam to a close. At least Art and I did. Bill just kept on keeping on doing his one-man jam. Hell, he didn't need no stinking electricity. I think he was still at it when we went to leave. Anyway, I had a blast. Thanks, Michele. Thanks, Todd.